Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. I was halfway through flagging late shipments when the sentence landed like a stapler thrown at the wall. You're the worst part of my life. I wish you'd just leave. My name is Grant Weller, 38, operations manager for a logistics outfit in Columbus, Ohio. Tuesday, 8:17 p.m. Home office light buzzing, spreadsheet open, coffee going lukewarm beside my keyboard. She stood in the doorway to the room we pretended was mine, framed by the hall lamp, arms folded in a way that said this speech had been rehearsed. The glow from the monitor made a pale reflection on the picture glass behind her. Our wedding photo, the one with the laughing candid taken after the formal shots. I stared at the numbers on my screen, then at her face, and understood the math had shifted somewhere I hadn't tracked. Her tone wasn't fiery. That would have made it easier. She sounded like a supervisor denying a vacation request, efficient, impersonal, confident she'd done the paperwork. When I finally stood, the chair rolled back and tapped the filing cabinet. She didn't flinch. 3 months ago, she would have apologized for the sharp words, or at least softened them with a shrug. Lately, she had switched to a kind of managerial detachment, like she'd been promoted and I hadn't read the memo. This was the capstone. A verdict, not a discussion. Our house felt different even before that line. The weekend pancakes had evaporated into separate breakfasts. She started scheduling wellness nights, which seemed to require more makeup than a typical yoga class. Group chats had become her background soundtrack, little eruptions of laughter from the living room while I checked route updates or double-checked carrier audits on the couch. Eye contact shortened. Touch became ceremonial. Hello pecks in the kitchen while her attention stayed glued to notifications. Goodbyes delivered over her shoulder while she grabbed a jacket that smelled more like clubs than eucalyptus detergent. I had asked once, a month back, what changed. She said she'd been waking up lately, reading about self-worth and reclaiming time. It sounded fine in theory. Everyone could use better boundaries. Yet the new boundaries ran one way. Plans we made together dissolved under the blanket excuse of needing space, while favors and conveniences stayed intact. My car made her errands easier. My Amex smoothed impulsive retail therapy. My calendar flexed around last-minute invitations her friends sent from patio bars. An arrangement that benefited her continued, while the partnership that justified it thinned out like a sweater stretched past shape. She didn't raise her voice tonight. She delivered the wish the way you'd return a damaged shipment. Wrong item, send it back. I asked nothing dramatic. Only, is that truly how you see me? She gave a small shrug, as if to say the answer had been obvious for a while and I was late to the realization. Then she turned toward the hallway, leaving that sentence on my desk alongside my mouse and the shipping reports. I stayed standing, hands flat on the wood, feeling the quiet push into every corner of the room. The hum of the furnace, the slow tick from the baseboard, the tiny digital sigh from the monitor. Ordinary sounds that suddenly felt like stage cues for a scene I hadn't auditioned for. From the doorway of our bedroom, I could see the open suitcase she never fully unpacked anymore. Trips kept multiplying. A retreat, a bachelorette weekend, a spontaneous beach run with the girls. Tickets bought with miles we'd earned on my work travel, nights comped with points I stockpiled on warehouse audits. She'd begun speaking in borrowed phrases too, lines lifted straight from podcasts and reels. Men who crave stability can't provide excitement. Partners should never limit personal growth. Everyone deserves a second adolescence. It came out polished, like someone else's handwriting scrolling across her voice. If this were a different kind of story, I might catalog the red flags like I do inventory logs. Fine. There were plenty. Passwords changed with a laugh about cybersecurity. A new passcode on her phone, then a different one the following week. A perfume I couldn't place. A gym bag left out with a cocktail wristband tucked in the side pocket. Dinner reservations canceled at the last minute because the vibe was off, followed by selfies with friends at places I'd suggested. She'd always been social. Lately, she'd become performative. Life lived toward a camera, affection outsourced to hearts and fire emojis. Meanwhile, I felt like the untagged photographer, present but invisible. I ran a finger along the edge of my desk to steady my breath. My job has taught me that panic scrambles decisions. You keep the checklist. You note the discrepancy. You don't yank the alarm unless the fire has started. I closed the spreadsheet and looked at the photo behind her. A grainy print of us on Lake Erie, wind in her hair, my hand cupping her shoulder. I remembered how she gripped my wrist that day and whispered, "Don't let go." The contrast wasn't poetic. It was proof of motion. People move. Sometimes they drift. Sometimes they choose a different river. Something else surfaced while I stood there. A thin wire of calm, unexpected and steady. Maybe because the sentence she chose was so absolute. Worst part of her life. That level of finality clarifies things. It removes the fog of maybe and later. She'd thrown a switch, whether she recognized it or not. You can negotiate complaints. You cannot bargain with contempt. Contempt ends games. I powered down the monitor. The room darkened to that soft blue from the hall lamp. On my way to the kitchen, I passed the rack with our spare keys. Mine hung on its hook, labeled with a small red tag from a hardware store. Hers dangled beside it. I took mine, slipped it into my pocket, and kept walking. The coffee had gone cold. I poured it out and rinsed the mug. The movement settled me. Familiar task, tidy finish. On the counter lay a postcard from a real estate sign company, advertising updated yard stakes. I flipped it over, traced the business address with my thumb, found myself wondering what the rent looked like on the new lofts over in Italian Village. In the living room, she was texting fast, fingers drumming the glass, face backlit by her screen. She didn't look up. I grabbed my jacket from the peg by the door and leaned into the sleeve, feeling the weight of the wallet in the inside pocket, the braided leather creak at my wristwatch. My heartbeat slowed. My voice felt like gravel smoothed by water. I told her I'd heard her, that I understood exactly what she'd said. She gave a quick nod without lifting her eyes. That told me more than any shouted argument could have. She had gotten used to throwing lines and watching me catch them. Back in the office, I opened a new note on my phone and wrote a line I knew I'd need later. When someone tells you what role you play in their life, believe them. Then I added 3 bullet points beneath it: accounts to review, documents to secure, a calendar reminder for Friday morning at 8. Each tap of the screen made the next moment easier to imagine. On the shelf above the printer sits a framed photo of my dad, sleeves rolled up, smiling with a chipped front tooth. A man whose advice always boiled down to 2 words: handle it. He taught me to pack a tackle box the same way I run a warehouse audit. Methodical, light on flair, heavy on readiness. I looked at his picture and felt that old instruction seat itself inside my chest. Handle it. I shut off the lamp and let the hallway light guide me back. She was still typing, still living in that glowing rectangle where every feeling can be validated by a stranger in seconds. I felt oddly grateful for the stone-solid certainty I carried up the stairs. I had been waiting for clarity. She handed it to me in 12 words. Whatever happened next would start from that clarity. Morning arrived with that fluorescent hush only kitchens seem to hold. She moved through it like a hotel guest, polite, self-contained, eyes fixed on her phone while the coffee maker breathed steam across the counter. My hello floated across the room and landed somewhere between the toaster and the fruit bowl. She tapped out a reply to someone I couldn't see and drifted past me, perfume trailing after her like a decision already made. By lunch, the silence had strategy. Our shared calendar, once a map of dinners, errands, appointments, went empty on her side. A tiny act, easy to miss, but in logistics you learn that gaps tell the best stories. That evening I got home to an open closet and a row of new dresses I hadn't seen her buy. Tags still on, brand names that don't appear accidentally. She posed in one by the mirror, angled her phone for a story, and asked the screen for opinions she never asked of me. Habits that used to anchor us were loosened one loop at a time. There was a weekly show we watched together. She caught up during breaks at work. Dinner became separate microwaves humming in different rooms. The big framed photo from Hocking Hills vanished from the hallway, replaced by a print with geometric lines and inspirational words about freedom. I found the photo under a stack of magazines in the laundry room, face turned down like it had something to be ashamed of. When she spoke, it sounded rehearsed, the language of a script pulled from reels and podcasts. I heard about energy drains and reclaiming time, about men who suppress growth with schedules and predictable routines. Those points might hold water in the abstract. Here, they served as a flexible permission slip. Plans I proposed were stifling. Invitations from her friends were nourishing. Analysis complete. Late that week, She dressed in the bedroom while music pulsed from her phone. Sequins, low back, lipstick with a name I couldn't pronounce. I asked calmly where she was headed. Out, she said to the mirror. She held my gaze in the reflection for half a second, long enough to confirm I'd heard the boundary, then snapped a photo and sent it into the warm applause of her inbox. I watched taillights slide away and timed the quiet of the house by the blinking modem. A pattern formed. Thursday became Friday, became Saturday. Returns well after midnight. Laughter still clinging to her like glitter. In the mornings, she preferred sunglasses and water with lemon. When I made eggs, she waved me off and scrolled through the highlights of a night I hadn't been invited to. I set my plate down, ate slowly, and measured my breathing. It's strange how stillness can feel like strength when someone is begging you to stumble. The pressure wasn't only social. Access points started shifting. The Wi-Fi password changed. She said the provider forced the update. Our streaming profiles reordered themselves with shows I never watch. She adjusted autopays on the joint card to free up her personal one-for self-care purchases, a phrase broad enough to cover anything with next-day shipping. The first time a transaction alert pinged for a high-end hotel bar, I simply took out a pen and wrote the time in a small notebook I keep for freight claims. A man who tracks pallets can track patterns. I asked one direct question exactly once. We were walking from the garage after work, tires still ticking from heat, the air heavy with cut grass. Is there someone else? It came out level, free of accusation, just a request for a coordinate on the map. She smiled without warmth and said, "Wouldn't you like to know?" That line did more than taunt. It certified the game. Ambiguity is a tactic. I let the door close behind us and filed the answer where I keep shipping exceptions. Noted, unresolved, affects routing. Her friends began curating her narrative. A group chat became a tribunal where my routines stood trial. I heard fragments when she put the phone on speaker in the bathroom. Live a little, you're not his mother. He's comfortable because you carry the spark. By then, even my coffee habits had become evidence against me. I reached for the grinder on Saturday and caught myself smiling at the absurdity. Somewhere, a panel of strangers believed freshly ground beans were a warning sign. The house reflected her campaign. My jackets migrated to the spare room. The plant I watered on Sundays appeared on her side of the office window. Photo frames on my desk turned to face the wall after a day of decluttering. These weren't accidents or tidiness sprees. They were careful edits, a layout preparing for a new tenant. I wiped the fingerprints from my monitor and set a password I hadn't used before, not to hide secrets, just to preserve something that still belonged to me. So I matched her calm with a quieter version of my own. I didn't chase explanations or perform jealousy. I counted. I scanned receipts I knew I'd want preserved and saved them to a drive she never checks. I gathered warranties, policy numbers, and serials into a single folder on my phone labeled House. I moved my passport from the drawer in the foyer to the small safe in the attic where I keep my grandfather's watch. 2 keys went on a new ring, office file cabinet and lockbox. Those clicks sounded like a man closing drawers after inventory, not a husband plotting revenge. Her provocations gained an audience. At a small backyard gathering thrown by a mutual friend, she spoke about spontaneity and how some people live life on autopilot. A soft laugh followed, heads turned toward me, and she pretended she hadn't meant anything by it. Later, when the music quieted, she brought a drink to a coworker I'd met twice and stood close enough that the conversation required breath shared across inches. I handled dishes. I shook hands. I thanked the host and drove us home without commentary. On the ride, she leaned her head against the window like a character ready for the next scene. That week I took an early lunch and walked along the Scioto in a wind that smelled like rain. I made a list on my phone titled Stability, a word I've been accused of worshiping. It included my credit union, the lawyer who handled our wills 5 years ago, the HR portal at work, and a locksmith whose number I saved when we bought the house. Nothing flamboyant. Nothing she'd feel as a strike. Stability isn't a cage, it's a map out. As the days stacked up, the pressure to react grew almost theatrical. She expected a scene. She wanted a slammed door, raised voice, a desperate speech, anything confirming that I'd accept her frame. The boring husband clinging while the heroine reclaims herself. I gave her the opposite. When she came home at 1 a.m. with mascara smudged and laughter still in her throat, I handed her a glass of water, said I was turning in, and locked the office on my way to bed. That tiny click, barely louder than a fingernail on wood, traveled farther than a scream. One evening, she floated the line again. If you're unhappy, just go. The phrasing had the gloss of confidence, but the eyes waited. I met them and answered in full sentences, calm enough to sign. I heard you last week. I've been taking it seriously. She blinked, as if the script required pleading and I'd skipped to a different page. The room went quiet except for the refrigerator humming behind her. That hum felt like a metronome at the end of rehearsal. Time to get the cues right. I added a final habit to my routine. Before sleeping, I set my phone on airplane mode and wrote 3 short lines about the day. What changed, what stayed, what mattered. The exercise kept me honest. It also turned vague discomfort into an orderly ledger. Patterns hardened. Strength collected. The pressure she kept applying created a narrow, well-lit corridor leading to a door I hadn't been ready to consider. Now I could see the handle. I wasn't withdrawing to punish her or build a case to win spectators. This was something simpler, reclaiming the authority to author my own decisions. A man can accept truth without applause. A man can stand still in a storm and let it pass while he puts on his boots. By the time Sunday came, I'd ironed a shirt, laid out my work bag, and placed a folded sheet of paper inside the front pocket with the word "next" at the top. Terms weren't set yet. Consequences weren't written. But the pressure had done its job. The decision to act had moved from the abstract into the calendar. Friday began with the kind of sky that looks like brushed steel. I left before sunrise and parked 2 blocks from the firm, a brick building beside a bakery that smelled like warm sugar. The receptionist offered water. I declined and kept my hands on the folder in my lap. When Hector Lynn stepped into the lobby, he gave a small nod that meant he'd read what I sent the night before: screenshots, bank alerts, the single sentence she'd thrown at me in the office doorway. His conference room felt like an operating theater. Clean table, quiet clock, pens aligned. I laid out my notes the way I'd present a warehouse audit. Timeline first, artifacts second, outcomes last. Hector listened. I still, then asked the question that mattered. What do you want to keep? I answered like a man who had already decided. The house. My car. Retirement accounts I built long before we met. Stability, more than trophies. He pulled our prenup from a thin drawer. I remembered signing it at 32, before the wedding, when everything we owned fit in 2 apartments and optimism. The document looked short now, clinical in the best way. Separate property remained separate. A voluntary abandonment clause narrowed support to a modest transition window. The house down payment counted as my premarital contribution. If either spouse initiated separation without cause, exclusive use of the residence could be granted as a temporary order pending final division. Hector tapped each section with the same pen, steady as a metronome, building a map through the next month. Here's our sequence, he said. We serve notice. We petition for exclusive occupancy and temporary control of the joint accounts so bills get paid while we sort division. Freeze secondary cards immediately. Move your direct deposit. Collect serial numbers for major items. Photograph every room. Use neutral language. No accusations. Facts close doors that drama leaves open. I wrote each step, underlined twice, then handed over a retainer I'd already authorized through my credit union app while the coffee brewed at home. From the curb outside his office, I called HR and switched my paycheck to the account I opened last year for side projects. 10 minutes later, I revoked her card on the primary Visa, removed digital wallet tokens, and set alerts to ping me for every charge above $40 until the court order landed. I placed a hold on outbound transfers from joint savings. The banker used phrases like enhanced verification and 2 signatures on file. Utilities moved to my individual card. I changed the cloud password and created a read-only archive for household files, wills, policy docs, tax returns, so discovery later wouldn't feel like spelunking. Finally, I booked a locksmith for my office door only. Boundaries can be specific without turning a house into a fortress. By 9, the plan had rhythm. I drove to the print shop and made 2 full sets of photographs, one for Hector, one for my records, each image time-stamped. Living room shelves, electronics, artwork, her jewelry box closed and sealed in its own snapshot so inventory would be beyond dispute. I took a picture of the odometer on my car. I filmed a slow pan of the garage, the attic, the office. Logistics has taught me that proof is a kindness to your future self. At lunch, I met Hector again to review the letters. The separation notice read like a weather report, clear, dated, precise. It confirmed that I would be exercising my rights under the agreement, requested exclusive occupancy while proceedings moved forward, and established a window for her to collect personal belongings with a third party present. The second document listed immediate changes: financial access suspended pending orders, vehicle assignments, mail rerouting to a private box, communications through counsel unless logistics required a quick answer. It offered short-term health insurance coverage through the end of the month as goodwill. It also reminded her that pets remain with whomever can document primary care. I attached vet receipts in my name. Driving home, I felt lighter in a way that wasn't joy. More like clean architecture after clutter. The locksmith arrived on time, installed a new office deadbolt keyed to a small brass oval, and gave me 2 duplicates. I thanked him and put one key in the drawer with my passport and grandfather's watch. Then I opened my laptop and ran a full backup of my phone and computer. Data, once secured, becomes quiet. She came in just after 6, windswept hair, a brightness she wore for other people still clinging to her voice. I was at the table with both envelopes and a pen. When she saw them, the brightness narrowed. She didn't sit. I slid the first packet across. "Granting you what you asked," I said. "Handled properly." My tone ran level, the way I talk to carriers when weather reroutes trucks. She scanned page 1 and laughed, sharp and quick, a reflex more than amusement. Then her eyes found the territory lines. Exclusive occupancy request, move-out schedule coordinated through counsel, pick-up windows with an inventory checklist, a line about the joint account requiring dual authorization, a note that her supplementary card had been removed at noon with a confirmation number cited in the margin. The laughter peeled away. "What is this?" The question sounded performative, a test to see if the old dynamic still existed. I answered exactly. "A legal plan that closes open loops. You said you wished I'd leave. The agreement says otherwise. You're free to live however you want. You just won't do it on my resources or inside my space while you evaluate me." She stepped back like the room had changed shape. Anger tried to assemble on her face, then faltered, replaced by calculation. "You can't lock me out of money." I pointed to the paragraph where the bank hold had been described and to the temporary order request prepared for filing at 8 a.m. Monday. "The court decides flow while we divide. Bills will be paid. Chaos won't." She reached for the second envelope with a snatch that signaled the script slipping. Inside sat a short letter of expectations. Respectful contact only, logistics by email, emergency texts allowed for safety issues, key handoff scheduled for Wednesday at 10 during the inventory session. I'd included a simple line that mattered as much as any clause. "There will be no public narrative from my side beyond. We are separating." That piece took the oxygen out of spectacle. She tried a different approach. "We can talk this through without lawyers." The words would have worked a year ago, maybe even a month ago. Today they landed on granite. "We're already talking through lawyers," I said, tapping Hector's card attached by a paperclip. "It's cleaner. It protects both of us. Emotion ruins precision." For a long minute, the kitchen sounded like a clock you only notice when everything else stops. Then she said the softer thing. "I didn't mean it when I said you were the worst part of my life." I breathed once, steady. That sentence did something neither of us can reverse. "You drew a line. I'm honoring it." Her shoulders dropped, as if the weight she expected me to carry had just rolled back to her side of the room. A few more phrases came, old habits reaching for handholds, but the plan stood. I offered water. She waved it away and stared at the documents again, searching for loopholes that didn't exist. I excused myself to the office and locked the new bolt with that small metallic click. Inside, I sent Hector a message, served in person at 6:14 p.m. Reaction, mixed, no incident. Proceed with filing first thing. I attached photos of the signed receipt and my inventory log. Then I opened a fresh document and wrote 3 lines for myself. Protect stability. Keep language simple. Act only through formal channels. When I returned, she had moved to the window and was looking out at the street as if a different answer might be waiting at the curb. I placed a neat stack of moving boxes beside the hall closet, flat, unopened, neutral, and set a roll of tape on top. "Pickup is Wednesday at 10, I said. "I'll be here with an observer. You'll have privacy to pack your things. If you prefer a service, schedule it through Hector." I'll accommodate within reason. Where exactly am I supposed to go? That wasn't a taunt. It was the first honest question of the night. Wherever aligns with your plans, I replied, softer than before. You asked for distance. I'm providing structure so the distance doesn't burn the house down on its way out. She closed the envelope and held it against her chest like a book she disliked but needed to finish. I picked up the pen, capped it, and felt, for the first time in weeks, the clean steadiness that comes when a system starts running the way it should. This wasn't revenge. It was boundary work executed with the same care I bring to loading docs and driver schedules. Calm, documented, enforceable. After she went upstairs, I stepped onto the porch. The evening had cooled, cicadas stitching a low chorus under the streetlights. I called my father's old number, the one I keep active just to hear his voice on anniversaries, and let it ring once before ending the call. Handle it, the memory whispered. I already had. The counter-strike lived on paper now, and paper, handled correctly, holds. The morning after the notice sat on the counter, she came downstairs with a face she hadn't worn in years. The confidence that had carried her through late nights and sharp remarks seemed thinner, like paint stretched too far across a wall. She poured coffee without asking if I wanted any. The quiet in the room had changed weight. By midday, the first ripple hit. Hector forwarded an email from her counsel requesting an urgent reconsideration of the move-out timeline. They wanted 2 more weeks. The request came dressed in polite language about scheduling conflicts and logistical burdens. I replied with a single sentence granting her the existing schedule in the notice, citing availability of the agreed third-party observer. The words were clean enough to pass for courtesy, but firm enough to hold their ground. That was the tone now, immovable without being theatrical. 2 days later, she tested a softer front. The conversation began with small talk about the weather and the neighbor's new dog. It detoured into how fast everything felt. Her eyes searched for a sliver of nostalgia, something to wedge between the legal walls I'd built. I listened, nodded once, then brought us back to logistics. Keys, storage boxes, utilities. She stopped mid-sentence, realizing this was no longer a stage for reconciliation speeches. Her circle began reacting, too. A mutual acquaintance called to say she'd heard a version of what was happening. That phrasing told me enough. She'd started crafting her side. I gave him the same one-line answer I'd prepared. We're separating. It's being handled properly. He paused, expecting more, but none came. In my absence, her narrative lost air. Facts are harder to inflate than feelings. The freeze on accounts began to show. An alert popped up from the bank. 3 declined transactions in a row at high-end boutiques. She must have realized then that the cushion she'd assumed would carry her through the transition had edges. That evening, she brought home a grocery bag of basics and cooked pasta in silence. She plated her portion, left mine untouched, then glanced at the counter where the legal envelopes had once been. The power balance had shifted. She felt it in her hands without needing to read another page. Her frustration found sharper outlets. She tried arriving home at odd hours, loud enough to wake the house. She played music late in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone with that deliberate, occupied posture. I responded by finishing my work, locking my office door, and sleeping through it. The absence of reaction unnerved her more than confrontation ever could. Without a tug on the line, her attempts at provocation dangled in still water. The scheduled pickup day arrived under a thin, bright sky. The observer stood by while she moved through the rooms, pulling clothes from hangers, sliding boxes across the floor. She lingered in the hallway where our old photo once hung, eyes on the blank space as if expecting the wall to speak. Every so often, she'd glance toward me, waiting for a comment, an opening, an olive branch, even a sting. None came. I was there to witness, record, and sign off when she was done. By early afternoon, the last box closed, tape torn in a final stretch. In the days after, her tone shifted again. Emails arrived with questions about splitting minor items, holiday traditions, even which friends belonged to which side. I answered only what required resolution. She began to sense that the social territory she'd hoped to keep on her terms had already redrawn itself. Friends we'd shared reached out less to her. More to me, not out of loyalty, but because calm is easier to be around than volatility. One evening, about a week after her move out, she sent a message without preamble. I think we rushed this. I read it twice, let the phone rest on the table, and poured myself a drink. The sentence was meant to plant a seed. But seeds don't take in soil that's already been tilled, leveled, and covered. I archived it without reply. The silence that followed wasn't about cruelty. It was about living in the structure I'd fought to protect. Word reached me through another friend that she'd been venting about how cold I'd been. The irony sat quietly in my mind. She'd asked me to leave. I'd honored her wish. She'd tried to turn that into a platform for control. I'd replaced it with terms she couldn't adjust. Coldness had nothing to do with it. This was simply the climate that emerges when boundaries are real. By the second week, the calls stopped. The only communication left came through attorneys, where sentences carried dates, attachments, and signatures. Her game, if that's what it had been, no longer had an audience. Without one, the performance ended. She was left with her version of freedom, exactly as she'd demanded, framed by the consequences she hadn't expected. From my side, the house settled into its own rhythm again. Paperwork in its proper drawers. Accounts running clean. Evenings free of second-guessing how to walk into a room. The storm she'd tried to keep swirling had blown itself out, leaving clear air and a structure still standing. Her moves had broken against walls built from preparation, not force. And when a game meets that kind of surface, it doesn't just stall, it disappears. The final hearing landed on a Thursday morning. Courtrooms have a smell: polished wood, recycled air, the faint trace of paper and ink. We sat at separate tables, the weight of the months between us measured in the silence before the clerk spoke our names. Her lawyer opened with familiar language about equitable resolution and preserving dignity. Mine responded with a clear outline of the agreement, the evidence, the timelines we'd met without deviation. The judge asked questions in that measured tone designed to pull clarity from clutter. I answered with dates, documents, and short sentences. She answered with longer phrases, glancing toward the bench for sympathy. The difference in approach was obvious. One side offered structure. The other leaned on impressions. In a room governed by written agreements, structure always wins. By mid-morning, the orders were read into record. The house stayed with me under the prenup clause. Retirement accounts remained untouched. Joint funds had already been divided per temporary orders, leaving nothing further to contest. Personal property lists matched the photographs from my inventory. The judge commended both sides for avoiding unnecessary drama. That compliment landed heavier than it sounded. It meant the work I'd done to keep this contained had paid off. Walking out, she caught up beside me in the corridor. "So that's it?" she asked. The words carried more resignation than fight. "That's it," I said. "Clean, final, and done." Her eyes searched for something. Remorse, second thoughts, maybe a hint of the man who used to make compromises for peace. He wasn't there anymore. I had no interest in undoing the clarity I'd earned. Outside, the winter air carried the kind of bite that clears the head. I shook Hector's hand, thanked him for keeping every move precise, then stepped toward my truck. She stood by the curb, talking to her lawyer, coat collar turned up against the wind. We didn't exchange goodbyes. There was nothing left to soften. Respect, once gone, doesn't return on polite terms. It has to be rebuilt from the ground up, and I had no plans to start that project. Back home, the house felt larger in ways that had nothing to do with square footage. My office door swung open without thought of intrusion. The kitchen counters stayed clear, every item in its place. Even the sound of the furnace cycling on carried a steadiness I hadn't noticed before. Space without tension isn't quiet, it's balanced. In the weeks after, small ripples reached me through mutual acquaintances. She'd moved into a rental closer to her job. Some friends drifted from her orbit, others stayed out of mine. The social map redrew itself without malice, simply following the path of least resistance. Those who remained in my life did so without the need for sides or explanations. They respected the way I'd handled it. Firm, contained, without spectacle. One evening, about a month after the hearing, I found a padded envelope in the mailbox. Inside was the spare key to my truck, the one she used to carry. No note, just the key in a small plastic bag. I set it on the workbench in the garage and left it there for a week before dropping it into the drawer with old batteries and spare screws. It belonged to a closed chapter. My days rebuilt themselves around routines I'd once let slide. Early runs before work, weekend calls with my brother, Saturday mornings fixing things that had been waiting for attention. There was no rush to fill space with new noise. I'd learned the value of letting a foundation settle before building on it again. Every so often, I'd catch myself thinking back to the moment she'd called me the worst part of her life. That sentence had been meant to wound. In a way, it had. But it had also done something more valuable. It clarified what lines could never be crossed without consequence. The life I was living now existed because I'd enforced that clarity. People sometimes ask if I'd take her back if she changed. The answer isn't wrapped in bitterness. It's in the understanding that respect isn't negotiable. Once it's broken, the shape of the relationship changes in a way that can't be restored by apology alone. You can rebuild trust with time and effort. Respect, once removed, leaves a different architecture entirely. On a Sunday afternoon, I sat on the porch watching the light shift across the yard. The phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Her name wasn't attached anymore. The text read, "Hope you're doing well." I looked at it for a moment, then deleted it without opening the thread. My life had reached a point where the only responses worth giving were the ones that moved forward. The sky turned that deep, late winter blue that promises spring without rushing it. I leaned back, feeling the boards beneath the chair, the air without weight. The chapter was closed, the terms upheld, the balance restored. I hadn't won in the way people think of winning. I'd simply refused to lose myself. And that, more than any court order or property line, was the real outcome. Respect wasn't something I'd bargained for. It was something I'd drawn as a boundary, defended without aggression, and kept intact by knowing when to walk away. And as the evening settled in, that knowledge felt like the most unshakable thing I owned.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.